Today we're diving into a really fascinating and honestly kind of unsettling idea. It's all about how the very act of trying to understand something might actually be destroying it. Welcome to The Meaning We Destroy. So, think about that for a second. What if trying to understand something can kill it? It's a really powerful and, let's be honest, counterintuitive thought. The idea that our desire to analyze and clarify the world, to make sense of it all, could actually be breaking it. To really get what this means, we've got to go back in time a bit.
So, let's start with something you probably know or at least have heard of, Greek tragedy. For most of us, right, these are ancient plays we read in a classroom. They're literature. We analyze them for themes, for character arcs. But what if that's a completely wrong way to look at it?
Because, back in ancient Athens, tragedy wasn't a book you just curl up with by yourself. No way. It was this huge, public, civic, religious event. It was something you experienced, something you underwent with your entire community. It was, in a way, a technology for processing the hardest parts of being human, but doing it together.
I mean, this was so much more than just a trip to the theater. The whole thing was a festival called the Great Dionysia, a ritual for the god Dionysus. It had processions, animal sacrifices. They would even present war orphans who were being raised by the state. And get this, funding the plays, that wasn't optional for the wealthy. It was a public duty. This was a deep, collective, full-body act of participation. It was not passive entertainment.
And this slide really nails the shift. On the left, you've got this living, breathing event. The meaning isn't in the play itself, it's something created by the entire community together. It's totally inseparable from the ritual, the festival, the presence of the god. Then, on the right, you have our modern way of doing things, a book, a single person, an analyst, trying to extract some stable meaning from a dead text. We literally turned a living ritual into a portable object.
And that, right there, is the heart of the problem. Our way of trying to understand these things isn't a neutral act. It's an active intervention that fundamentally changes the very thing it's looking at. We aren't just reading a play, we're taming a living force. Just think about the difference between those two words. On one hand, you have something living. It's unpredictable, powerful, wild. And on the other, you have something tame. It's stable, predictable, and totally under our control. That's the transformation we're talking about here.
The source material for this explainer has an incredibly sharp metaphor for this. It says that in our process of analysis, the panther becomes upholstery. A wild, living, dangerous creature gets flattened into a decorative pattern on a chair. I mean, the shape is still there, but all the life is just gone.
This whole process actually has a name: semantic domestication. It's the taming of a living, breathing meaning by the very act that tries to describe it. You make something easy to read, you make it clear, but you do it at the cost of its original power, its original force. You get the upholstery, but you lose the panther.
But this whole process can go even further than just taming something. Sometimes our explanations don't just flatten a meaning. No, they completely replace it. This is where we get into what you could call the killing of a sign.
The academic term for this is semiocide. It's basically the destruction of a native system of meaning by a more dominant institutional one. Think of it like a translation that doesn't just change the language, it replaces the entire original message with something completely different.
Okay, to make this really concrete, the source uses this powerful analogy from psychiatry. Imagine a person experiencing deep, real distress, a sign that their world isn't working for them anymore. They go for help, and that living, breathing distress gets replaced by an institutional category, a diagnosis. As the quote says, the patient gains a diagnosis and loses a world. Their personal story, their world, gets overwritten.
And once you see this pattern, you start seeing it absolutely everywhere. In psychiatry, that raw, lived distress becomes a disorder. In anthropology, a powerful, felt ritual gets reduced to a social function. And in classics, the gods, who are real, living forces for the Athenians, are flattened into mere literary devices. In every single case, a living, complex reality is overwritten by a neat, clean, institutional category.
So why does any of this matter right now? I mean, this isn't just about ancient Greece. This whole pattern of dismantling the collective ways we hold intense experiences is central to our modern world. You could even say we live in an age of explanation.
This unraveling has basically happened in three key ways. First, theater got privatized. It stopped being this civic duty and just became a private aesthetic choice you might make on a Friday night.
Second, our distress became medicalized. Intense states like grief or ecstasy, which used to be held in myth and story, are now managed by clinical frameworks. And finally, our rituals were desacralized. Those big collective events that once held us all together have been watered down or, even worse, just turned into things to buy and sell.
And this is the absolute key takeaway. The intense human experiences that tragedy used to deal with, grief, ecstasy, political crisis, violence in families, none of that has gone anywhere. We still feel all of it, all the time. What's changed, what is atrophied, are the shared public technologies for holding and processing those states together. We've been left to face them, for the most part, completely alone.
So this brings us to the end, and to the central tension of this whole explainer. What is the price of clarity? What do we actually lose when we insist on explaining everything away?
Now, to be really clear, the argument here is not that analysis is bad. Of course not. The danger is in the totalization of analysis, this belief that once we've put something in a nice, neat box, we've fully understood it. The problem pops up when one way of knowing claims to be the only way of knowing.
So we'll end by turning the question back to you. When we demand that everything has to be clear, rational, and easily explained, what other forms of meaning, what kinds of embodied knowledge, what complex, untamable beauty are we making impossible to see? What panthers are we turning into upholstery?